Hey, welcome back to the Mining Pod. Today we're talking public policy. So hopefully everyone stays on air for this one because sometimes people don't like politics, but it's presidential election season. So we brought on Kyle Schneps from Foundry to talk about that.
Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com. Thanks for listening to the Mining Pod. Want more? Subscribe to our main feed on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts for another weekly show on Bitcoin stocks. And check out our newsletter at miningpod.blockspace.media today.
Kyle, welcome to the Mining Pod.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, we were just at Masari Mainnet and we had a great panel. It was honestly kind of a hodgepodge of people in the mining industry. We had investors, operators, hosting, and then you were there kind of giving like the reg side of stuff. And I think it was a pretty good panel. We definitely just want to follow up because here's an opportunity to talk about what's happening with the industry going into what could be one of the most important presidential elections for Bitcoin. Everyone always says like this is the most important presidential election, but for Bitcoin, I think there's a pretty good case for it given the history of the Harris or the Biden administration and now Trump's claims. But we'll start with just some context. Why is Foundry involved with lobbying in the first place or involved with the political scene? Maybe you guys don't describe it as lobbying, but why do you guys engage with this?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, especially as we're most famous for our pool, right? We have sort of the largest Bitcoin mining pool, and certainly I think one of the most sophisticated ones. But really, Foundry's goal is to empower decentralized infrastructure across, the digital asset space, and Bitcoin, of course, is one of our main focuses. I think the fact that we are this is a new technology, right? This is a relatively new innovation. Some of us have been in this years, and that's like it's like dog years in crypto or Bitcoin for a lot of people, but it really is still new. It's a new technology, and any new technology is subject to naysayers, especially disruptive technologies that upset the status quo. It makes those industries vulnerable, those that are doing the innovating, and that results in a lot of political attacks. And we saw that with the internet, and there were certainly controversies with when Tesla started to take off with the electric car, and the main car manufacturers trying to push back against that. So there's always going to be disruptive technology that gets tons of pushback from the status quo. And that's why we need to be involved in the public policy aspect of this, because we need to educate. We need to make sure that these policymakers are getting the full story, because if they're just hearing it from traditional finance, or if they're just hearing it from traditional industry or the media, they're going to get a very biased view. And so we need to make sure that we are in their ears all the time. And so Foundry made the decision 3 years ago to get involved. We were one of the first companies to bring on somebody, myself in this case, who would do this full time. And a lot of that was spurred by the New York mining moratorium. We could probably get into that later, but I think that's the general reason why we want to be involved here, is because with any innovative new industry, we are going to get naysayers and people pushing back on us as we continue to grow. And so we want to be able to grow and have policymakers support us.
I think we can get into the New York stuff now, honestly, because you guys focus on both like a federal level and the state level, and maybe some local stuff as well. I'm not sure, but you guys are based out of New York. Like Foundry is well known to be based in New York. The New York moratorium is a huge thing for the mining industry, and that should lapse in November. Maybe a quick update on the state of that, and then also how you guys kind of think of interacting with Bitcoin mining in the states and education lobbying there versus the federal level as a follow-up.
Yeah, I'll start with the last part first, which is I think that due to there being a lot of, in terms of mining legislation, tons of gridlock in DC with the split houses over the past 4 years. With that gridlock, a lot of the legislation around Bitcoin and specifically mining has been relegated to the state level. And we've seen positive interactions with the states, with the right to mine bill, that has, been successful in places like Oklahoma and elsewhere. And then we've seen some negative pushback like we saw in New York. And New York is kind of a really interesting case study. And I think it'll be something that, a couple of years from now, when we go back and analyze it, it was sort of the first battleground. It was the place where the mining industry and generally speaking, the crypto industry started to, really become politically involved and start to develop our, truthful talking points to bring to policymakers in New York. And it was an intense battle. And right now, where we stand with it, and I'll just add, like, so many of the things that the industry came together to do, so many of the great public policy work that has been sort of run of the mill now, those talking points and those strategies and those sort of truth to power methodologies were all developed during that time. And now they're kind of like have moved federal, and with Trump getting involved and a lot more federal attention, we've been able to make those arguments on the national stage. In terms of the New York mining moratorium, this is one that through our efforts was able to kind of get rolled back to sanity. To start off, it was a pure ban on Bitcoin mining, like just ban everything about this and let's just be done. And we sort of were able to roll that back to, specific Bitcoin operations that are operating behind the meter at power plants in New York State. It still wasn't, the blue skies, outcome, but it did affect not so many people there as a result of our efforts. However, we are at a stage now where the moratorium is going to be over at the end of this year, toward the end of this year. And we're also anticipating the New York Department of Environmental Conservation study, which was tacked on to that bill, that legislation. And so that study will come out toward the end of this year as well. I personally am starting to anticipate that that study will be used to do further pushback against the industry and to try to make that moratorium more permanent. And so we are preparing for that. We're continuing to educate policymakers in New York. We're continuing to do events in New York when we can. It's not a state that nobody in this industry wants to write off any state, right? Because they all will eventually come around. Technology, Bitcoin specifically, it's almost inevitable. And so we don't want to burn any bridges, and we do want to continue working with folks, especially those who are in good faith trying to do this. But we will see what this study says. Usually environmental studies, there's not many things you can do a study about that don't have an impact on the environment. So they're a little bit of, you kind of know what's coming. You could do an environmental study on somebody producing any widget and it's not going to be good. So that's how they're designed. And so we are anticipating that, we may see a new push of FUD in New York toward the end of this year, especially as the election is over and this comes out and politicians see how, they're going to have to make a determination on how much political capital they have left to try to restart up that battle. But I think that over the past 3 years, since the moratorium, or 2 years since it was actually passed, there have been so many, we've made a lot of headway with the positives, what this technology can do for the environment, what it can do for the grid, what Bitcoin mining can do for renewable energy production. These things are starting to, whereas first they were just like niche talking points that we were trying to like actually educate lawmakers in New York about. Now they've become part of the national dialogue, thanks to companies like Foundry and a lot of folks online who do tons of work, Batten, and a lot of the public mining companies that have also tried to convey this message. And so I think we are in a better place to educate people when it comes to that. But I do anticipate a lot of new FUD.
Good. I mean, as long as DeVry isn't, cited in the paper, I might be okay with whatever happens. But we'll see if that comes true or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So
no, well, he was certainly one of the people who was. I was sitting in meetings. Where I was able to listen into some of the things that Earth Justice and other folks were saying, and the main leader of that whole political push, Assemblymember Anna Kellis, and it was right off of the DeVries talking points, which was like,
oh my goodness,
every Bitcoin transaction is 2 iPhones in a landfill. I mean, they were saying this like really angrily. Which is completely false, and it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how Bitcoin even works to begin with. But hopefully, I think we're in a much better place now.
Good. Okay. Well, I'll do a little Control F when that paper comes out, and we'll see how frustrated I get. When I think of 2024 and the politics around energy, and maybe specifically Bitcoin mining, I think of 1, Bitcoin miners decided to throw their hat in with Trump. I think of 2, Trump, maybe regardless of the Bitcoin miners, but I do think because of their efforts, Trump really jumping in Bitcoin as well. And then the third thing I think about is the rise of ChatGPT and AI bringing this energy conversation to the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and almost like a tech white pill, if you will, where it's like, oh, okay, like energy is not a bad thing because it makes my life so much better. And like, maybe there's a way to like solve this energy crisis. Want to get some comments from you about like how you saw 2024. How did you see it on the energy side, and how politicians are reacting to all these various movements, whether it be like the populist part of Trump that is like pushing for like Bitcoin, or it be like the technological side where it's like, oh, ChatGPT makes my life better, energy is okay now. How have you kind of seen 2024 roll out, and how are you seeing politicians kind of take a look at this last year when it comes to energy and politics?
Yeah, well, starting on the sort of the national election and Trump's role here, the reason why